The grand ballroom of Ashford Manor glittered with candlelight and aristocratic laughter, a world where every gesture spoke of power and privilege. Eleanor Winters stood quietly against the wall, her plain servant's dress a stark contrast to the silken gowns that swept past her. She had learned to make herself invisible in these gatherings, to serve without being seen. But tonight, Duke Hartley's cold eyes had found her across the room, and his lips had curved into a cruel smile. What Eleanor did not know was that within moments her entire life would shatter before the gathered elite, and a secret buried for 20 years would tear through the carefully constructed lies of England's most powerful family. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Eleanor Winters had known her place since the moment she could understand words. Born in the servants' quarters of Ashford Manor, she had grown up in the shadows of grandeur, where marble staircases spiraled toward painted ceilings and crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across polished floors. Her mother, Martha Winters, had been the head housekeeper, a woman of quiet dignity who had raised Eleanor with firm instructions about the invisible line that separated them from the family they served. The year was 1873, and England's countryside sprawled in ordered perfection around the manor. Beyond the tall windows, manicured gardens stretched toward ancient oak forests, and tenant farms dotted the rolling hills like pieces on a chessboard. Inside, the world operated according to rules as rigid as iron, rules that Eleanor had memorized before she learned to read. She was 17 now, with dark chestnut hair that she kept pinned tightly beneath her white cap, and grey eyes that had learned to look down rather than meet the gaze of her betters. Her hands were small but strong from years of scrubbing floors, carrying heavy trays, and performing the 1,000 invisible tasks that kept the great house running. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, efficient and silent, exactly as a good servant should be. The master of Ashford Manor was Lord Pemberton, an elderly gentleman whose health had been failing for the past 3 years. He rarely left his chambers anymore, attended by physicians and his personal valet. The true power in the household had passed to his nephew, Duke Sterling Hartley, who had arrived 2 years prior to manage the estate and prepare for his eventual inheritance. Duke Hartley was everything the aristocracy admired in a man. At 32 years old, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that made people step aside when he entered a room. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with pale blue eyes that seemed to assess the value of everything they fell upon. His dark hair was always immaculately groomed, his clothing cut from the finest fabrics that London's tailors could provide. He spoke with the assured confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he desired. Eleanor had learned to fear him, though she would never have spoken such a thought aloud. There was a coldness in Duke Hartley that went beyond the usual distance between master and servant. When he looked at the staff, his expression suggested he was calculating their worth in pounds and shillings, deciding whether they were assets or expenses to be eliminated. In the 2 years since his arrival, he had dismissed a dozen servants for minor infractions, replacing them with workers who would accept lower wages. Her mother had warned her specifically about the Duke. "Keep your eyes down, and your words few when he is near," Martha had instructed. "Men like him view those beneath their station as objects, not people. Do not give him any reason to notice you, Eleanor. Invisibility is our greatest protection." Eleanor had followed this advice faithfully. When she served tea in the drawing-room, she kept her gaze fixed on the silver tray. When she passed Duke Hartley in the corridors, she pressed herself against the wall and curtsied low, waiting until his footsteps faded before continuing. She had become an expert at occupying space without claiming any of it, at being present without being seen. The servants' world existed parallel to the aristocratic one, occupying the same physical space, but operating in a different dimension entirely. Below stairs, in the servants' hall and the kitchen, life was simpler but no less structured. Mrs. Cooper, the cook, ruled her domain with a wooden spoon and sharp tongue. Mr. Thornbury, the butler, maintained order with quiet authority and a ledger that tracked every detail of household management. The footmen competed for the best positions, the housemaids gossiped during their brief moments of rest, and everyone understood that their security depended on maintaining the smooth operation of the household above. Eleanor had one true friend in this world, a girl her own age named Grace, who worked as a parlour maid. Grace had arrived at Ashford Manor a year ago, brought from London after her previous employer had died. She possessed a warmth and optimism that seemed impossible given their circumstances, and she had adopted Eleanor with the fierce loyalty of a sister. "You are far too serious, Ellie," Grace often teased her during their rare free moments. "You act as though one misstep will bring the entire manor crashing down." "In a way, it could," Eleanor would reply. "For us, at least. We have no safety net, Grace. One moment of displeasing the Duke, and we would be on the street with no references and no prospects." Grace would shake her head, her blonde curls bouncing beneath her cap. "Then we must simply avoid displeasing him. Though I must say, I have never seen a gentleman so thoroughly displeasing himself. Have you noticed how he looks at people? As though we are furniture he is considering replacing." Eleanor had noticed, but she had also learned that noticing such things and speaking them aloud were two different matters entirely. The change in Eleanor's life began not with a grand event, but with a simple conversation overhead. She had been cleaning the library one afternoon, running her cloth carefully over the leather spines of books she would never be permitted to read, when voices drifted through the partially open door to the adjoining study. "The old man cannot last much longer," Duke Hartley's voice was saying. "Another month, perhaps 2. The physicians confirm his heart is failing, and you are certain the will is in order?" This second voice belonged to Mr. Blackwood, the Duke's solicitor, a thin man with a perpetually disapproving expression. "Entirely certain. I have seen to every detail. When Lord Pemberton dies, everything passes to me, as it should. The title, the estate, the investments, everything. There are no other heirs, no complications. What of the servants? Will you retain them?" "Some. Those who are useful and inexpensive. The others will be dismissed. I have already identified several positions that can be eliminated. There is no reason to maintain such a large staff. This is a new age, Blackwood. Efficiency and profit are what matter, not outdated notions of loyalty and tradition." Eleanor had frozen in place, her heart pounding. She knew she should not be hearing this conversation, that she should slip away immediately before her presence was discovered. But her feet seemed rooted to the floor as the Duke continued. "The girl, Eleanor Winters, for instance, what position does she hold?" "One of the housemaids, I believe. Why do you ask?" "No particular reason. I have noticed her about the house. She has a certain quality about her, something refined despite her station. It is curious." "Curious, Your Grace. Only that she seems wasted in such menial work. She could be trained for something more visible. Perhaps service in the drawing room. She has a pleasing appearance when one actually looks at her." "I defer to your judgment in household matters, Your Grace." The conversation had shifted to financial matters after that, and Eleanor had finally managed to move her feet, slipping from the library before she could be discovered. But the Duke's words had planted a seed of unease that grew with each passing day. She tried to dismiss her concerns, telling herself that the Duke's comments meant nothing. Perhaps he had simply been making an idle observation. But she could not shake the memory of his tone, the calculating quality in his voice when he spoke of her. "You are worrying over nothing," Grace assured her when Eleanor finally confessed what she had heard. "Gentlemen of his rank do not truly see us, Ellie. We are like the wallpaper to them, decorative but unremarkable. Whatever thought crossed his mind, I am certain he has already forgotten it." Eleanor wanted to believe her friend, but she had developed an instinct for danger over her years in service, and that instinct was screaming that something had shifted in the careful balance of her world. 2 weeks after the library conversation, Eleanor received an unexpected summons. "Mrs. Cooper delivered the message during breakfast in the servants' hall, her face revealing nothing of what she might be thinking. Eleanor Winters, you are to report to Duke Hartley's private study at 9 o'clock this morning. See that you are presentable. A hush fell over the breakfast table. Servants were rarely summoned to the Duke's private study unless they were being dismissed or reprimanded. Eleanor felt her appetite vanish, though she forced herself to finish her porridge. She would need her strength whatever was coming. Grace squeezed her hand beneath the table. Perhaps he simply wants to commend you on your work. You are the most diligent maid in the house. But even Grace's voice lacked its usual conviction. At precisely 9 o'clock, Eleanor stood outside the heavy oak door of the Duke's study, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. She had changed into her best black dress and starched white apron, pinned her cap precisely as regulations demanded. Whatever was about to happen, she would face it with dignity. She knocked. 3 soft raps. Enter. The study was all dark wood and leather, shelves of books rising to the ceiling, a massive desk dominating the center of the room. Duke Hartley sat behind it, papers spread before him, looking every inch the master of a great estate. He did not look up immediately, allowing Eleanor to stand in uncertainty while he finished whatever he was writing. Finally, he set down his pen and raised his eyes to meet hers. Eleanor Winters, you may approach. She stepped forward, stopping at the respectful distance from the desk, her gaze lowered. Look at me when I address you. Eleanor raised her eyes, feeling exposed under his cold examination. The Duke studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. How long have you served in this household? All my life, Your Grace. I was born in the servants' quarters. And your mother? Martha Winters, Your Grace. She was the head housekeeper until her death 3 years ago. Ah, yes, I recall. An adequate worker from what I understand, and you have followed in her footsteps, content to spend your life scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I am grateful for my position, Your Grace. I do my work to the best of my ability. To the best of your ability. Yes, tell me, Eleanor, have you never wondered if you were meant for something more than this? The question caught her off guard. I do not understand, Your Grace. Do you not? Look at yourself. You possess qualities that are wasted in such menial labor. You speak well, better than most of your station. You carry yourself with a natural grace. With the proper training and presentation, you could serve in a much more elevated capacity. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, despite the Duke's seemingly complimentary words. There was something beneath them, something she could not quite identify, but that her instincts recognized as dangerous. I am content in my current position, Your Grace. Content? What a small word for a small ambition. But we shall see. I'm hosting a ball in 3 weeks' time, a gathering of the most important families in the county. I require additional staff for the event. You will be trained to serve in the ballroom itself, to carry refreshments among the guests. It will be an opportunity for you to demonstrate whether you are capable of more refined service. Your Grace, I am not certain I am suited. I am certain, he interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a blade through silk. And that is all that matters. You will report to Mrs. Cooper, who will oversee your preparation. You are dismissed. Eleanor curtsied and left the study, her mind reeling. As she descended the stairs back to the servants' quarters, she could not escape the feeling that she had just been moved like a piece on a chessboard, though she could not yet see the full pattern of the game being played. Grace found her an hour later, polishing silver in the butler's pantry. Well, what did he want? Eleanor told her, watching her friend's expression shift from curiosity to concern. I do not like it, Grace said finally. Why would he single you out for special attention? It is not natural, Ellie. I know, but what choice do I have? To refuse would be insubordination. I would be dismissed without references. Then we must be vigilant. I will watch over you during this ball. Whatever game the Duke is playing, you will not face it alone. Eleanor embraced her friend. grateful beyond words. But even Grace's loyalty could not fully dispel the dark premonition that had settled over her heart like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. The 3 weeks before the ball passed in a blur of preparation that consumed every moment of Eleanor's existence. Mrs. Cooper took charge of her training with the grim determination of a general preparing troops for battle. Every morning before dawn, Eleanor practiced carrying trays loaded with delicate crystal glasses, learning to balance them perfectly while walking across uneven surfaces and navigating tight spaces. She studied the proper way to serve aristocratic guests without drawing attention to herself, how to anticipate needs before they were spoken, how to become invisible while remaining constantly present. A good servant is like air, Mrs. Cooper instructed, watching Eleanor's movements with critical eyes. Essential but unnoticed. The moment a guest becomes aware of your presence, you have failed. Do you understand? Yes, Mrs. Cooper. I hope you do, girl. Duke Hartley has made it clear that any failures during this event will reflect poorly on the entire household. We all depend on you performing flawlessly. The weight of this responsibility pressed down on Eleanor's shoulders, adding anxiety to her already troubled thoughts. She knew the other servants were watching her, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed resentment. Why should she be elevated to serve in the ballroom while they remained below stairs? What made her special? The only answer Eleanor could provide was that she had not sought this attention and would have gladly avoided it if she could. Grace remained her constant support, sneaking moments throughout each day to check on her friend's well-being. You look exhausted, Ellie. Are you eating enough? Sleeping enough? I am managing, Eleanor would reply, though in truth she felt stretched thin as paper, worn down by the relentless demands and the constant undercurrent of dread she could not shake. On the evening before the ball, Duke Hartley summoned her again, this time to inspect her appearance in her serving uniform. She stood in his study, wearing the special black dress that had been prepared for the event, more refined than her usual work attire, with a crisp white apron and matching cap that had been starched to perfection. The Duke circled her slowly, examining every detail with the same cold assessment she had seen him apply to horses he was considering purchasing. Adequate, he pronounced finally. Though we shall remove the cap. Your hair should be visible, arranged simply but neatly. Your Grace, it is not proper for a servant to appear before guests without her cap. I will determine what is proper in my household, he interrupted, his voice sharp with warning. You will arrange your hair as I have instructed. Am I understood? Yes, Your Grace. Good. Tomorrow evening you will serve in the ballroom as we discussed. I have high expectations, Eleanor. I trust you will not disappoint me. There was something in his tone that made her stomach clench with apprehension, but she had no choice except to curtsy and agree. The day of the ball arrived with the crystalline clarity of early autumn. The entire household moved with the orchestrated precision of a military operation. Florists transformed the ballroom and reception rooms with elaborate arrangements of hothouse flowers. The kitchen became a realm of controlled chaos as Mrs. Cooper and her staff prepared dishes that would feed 100 aristocratic guests. Footmen polished every surface until the manna gleamed, while housemaids ensured that every chamber pot was empty, every bed perfectly made, every detail attended to with obsessive care. As evening approached and the first carriages began arriving, Eleanor dressed in her special uniform and arranged her hair as the Duke had commanded. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror in the servants' hall, barely recognizing herself. With her hair visible and the refined dress, she looked less like a servant and more like someone caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. You look beautiful, Grace whispered, standing beside her. But Ellie, I have a bad feeling about tonight. Promise me you will be careful. I promise. I will do my work and nothing more. By midnight, it will all be over, and things will return to normal. But even as Eleanor spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. Things would never return to normal after tonight. The ballroom was a vision of old-world splendor, transformed for the evening's festivities. 3 magnificent crystal chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles, their light dancing across walls adorned with silk hangings and gilt mirrors. An orchestra occupied one corner, filling the air with elegant waltzes and quadrilles. Long tables draped in white linen held elaborate refreshments, delicate pastries, savory canapés, champagne in crystal flutes that caught the candlelight and turned it into liquid gold. Eleanor took her position near the refreshment tables, holding her tray with steady hands despite her racing heart. Around her, England's aristocracy displayed itself in full, magnificent plumage. Ladies wore gowns of silk and satin in jewel tones, their décolletage adorned with diamonds and pearls that represented the wealth of empires. Gentlemen moved with casual confidence in their impeccably tailored evening clothes, their conversations ranging from politics to investments to the latest scandals whispered behind fans. Duke Hartley presided over it all from the center of the ballroom, the perfect host, welcoming guests with practiced charm. Beside him stood a young woman Eleanor had not seen before, introduced as Miss Charlotte Ashford, daughter of a neighboring Earl. She was beautiful in the way that society demanded. Pale skin, golden hair, delicate features, and an expression of serene confidence that came from knowing exactly where one belonged in the world's hierarchy. Eleanor moved through the crowd as she had been trained, offering refreshments with downcast eyes, collecting empty glasses, remaining invisible. For the first hour, everything proceeded smoothly. She began to think that perhaps her fears had been unfounded, that she would simply complete her duties and be forgotten. Then Duke Hartley's voice cut through the music and conversation like a knife through silk. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention for a moment." The orchestra fell silent. Conversations died away. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the Duke, who stood on the raised platform where the musicians had been playing. His face wore an expression of grave concern that Eleanor immediately recognized as false. "I regret that I must interrupt our pleasant evening with a matter of some urgency. It seems we have a thief among us." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. Fans fluttered with increased agitation. Gentlemen straightened, suddenly alert. Eleanor felt her blood turn to ice water in her veins. This afternoon, a valuable bracelet belonging to Miss Ashford went missing from her chambers. After conducting a thorough investigation, I am sorry to report that the evidence points to one of our servants. The Duke's eyes swept across the ballroom, and Eleanor knew with horrible certainty where they would land even before they found her. "You, Eleanor Winters, come forward." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. Every face in the ballroom turned toward her, expressions ranging from shock to disgust to barely concealed satisfaction at witnessing such a scandal. She tried to speak, to protest, but her voice had abandoned her completely. "Come forward," the Duke repeated, his tone allowing no defiance. Somehow Eleanor's feet carried her through the crowd that parted before her like the Red Sea, guests stepping back as though she carried a contagion. She reached the platform, her tray forgotten somewhere behind her, her hands empty and trembling. "Empty your pockets," Duke Hartley commanded. "Your Grace, I have done nothing wrong. I have never stolen anything in my life. Empty your pockets." With shaking hands, Eleanor reached into the small pocket sewn into her apron. Her fingers touched something hard and cold, something that had definitely not been there when she dressed. She pulled out a bracelet of intricate goldwork, set with sapphires, that caught the candlelight and blazed like captured sky. The crowd erupted in scandalized murmurs. Miss Ashford gasped dramatically, bringing her hand to her mouth. "That is my bracelet. How dare you?" "Your Grace, I did not take this. I have never seen it before this moment. Someone must have placed it—" "Silence." The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. "The evidence speaks for itself. You have betrayed the trust placed in you, betrayed the household that has sheltered you since birth. You are a thief and a liar, and you will be dealt with accordingly." Eleanor looked around desperately, seeking any sympathetic face in the crowd, but found only judgment and contempt. These aristocrats had already convicted her in their hearts. To them, she was merely a servant, inherently dishonest, inherently lesser. Her guilt was assumed simply by virtue of her station. "Guards!" the Duke called, and 2 footmen who had been stationed at the doors stepped forward. "Remove this criminal from the premises. She is to be held until the constabulary can be summoned to deal with her properly." As rough hands gripped her arms, Eleanor finally found her voice. "This is a lie. I am innocent. Someone has placed that bracelet in my pocket to frame me." But her protests were drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd and the Duke's final damning words. "Take her away. I will not have my guests subjected to the hysterics of a common thief." Eleanor was dragged from the ballroom, her last view being of Duke Hartley's face wearing an expression of cold satisfaction and Miss Ashford's smile of cruel triumph. As the doors closed behind her, cutting off the light and music and warmth, Eleanor understood with perfect clarity that she had been destroyed as thoroughly as if she had been physically murdered. In the cold corridor beyond, the guards marched her toward the servants' quarters, presumably to lock her in one of the storage rooms until morning. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision, tears of rage and helplessness and betrayal. Her life was over. She would be arrested, tried, likely transported to the colonies or imprisoned. Even if by some miracle she avoided legal punishment, she would never find work again. The Duke had ensured that. But why? What had she done to deserve such calculated cruelty? The answer, Eleanor realized with bitter clarity, was nothing. She had done nothing except exist, except be noticed, except possess some quality that the Duke had decided to destroy for reasons she would never understand. She was simply a pawn who had been sacrificed in some larger game, played by people who viewed those beneath their station as less than human. The guards were arguing about which room to use when a voice cut through the darkness, cultured and commanding, bearing an authority that made both men freeze instantly. "Release that girl immediately." Eleanor looked up through her tears to see a tall figure striding down the corridor, backlit by the candlelight from the main hall. As he drew closer, she could make out a man perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and features that spoke of aristocratic breeding. But unlike Duke Hartley's cold perfection, this man's face held something warmer, intelligence combined with what looked like genuine anger. "Who are you?" one of the guards demanded. "This is household business." The stranger produced a card and held it up, his voice cutting with the precision of a blade. "I am Nicholas Ashford, Earl of Hartwick, and you will release that girl and return immediately to your duties before I have you both dismissed for manhandling an innocent woman." The guards released Eleanor so quickly she nearly fell. They disappeared back toward the ballroom with remarkable speed, leaving her alone in the corridor with this Earl whose name she had never heard before. Earl Ashford looked at her with eyes that held concern rather than condemnation. "Are you injured, miss?" Eleanor found she could not speak, could only shake her head while tears continued to stream down her face. "Come," he said gently. "We are going to return to that ballroom, and we are going to set right the terrible wrong that has been done to you tonight. I know exactly what game Duke Hartley is playing, and I know exactly how to end it." He offered her his arm, a gesture of such unexpected respect that it broke through Eleanor's shock. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." The Earl's expression hardened with resolve. "Because I know the truth, Miss Winters. And it is past time the truth saw the light of day." The return to the ballroom felt like walking into a fever dream. Earl Nicholas Ashford kept his hand steady beneath Eleanor's elbow, supporting her as they approached the massive double doors. Her legs threatened to give way with each step, her mind still reeling from the nightmare that had unfolded moments before. But the Earl's presence beside her radiated a confidence that somehow steadied her trembling frame. When the doors swung open, the entire ballroom fell silent once more. The orchestra's instruments faded mid-note. Conversations died on painted lips. Every face turned toward the entrance, expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, as they registered not only Eleanor's return, but the identity of her escort. Duke Sterling Hartley stood exactly where Eleanor had last seen him, his composure cracking slightly at the sight of the Earl. Something flickered behind his cold eyes. Was it recognition? Fear? Eleanor could not quite identify it, but whatever it was, it transformed the Duke's expression from triumphant control to wary calculation in the span of a heartbeat. "What is the meaning of this?" Duke Hartley demanded, descending from the platform. "That woman has been accused of theft and removed from the premises. By what authority do you return her to my ballroom?" "By the authority of truth," Earl Ashford replied, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "And by the authority of my position as Earl of Hartwick and executor of Lord Pemberton's true final testament." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Duke Hartley's face drained of colour. "I do not know what game you are playing, Ashford, but this is neither the time nor the place. On the contrary, this is precisely the time and place." The Earl released Eleanor's arm and stepped forward, withdrawing a folded document from inside his coat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance to your evening, but I am afraid you have been gathered here under false pretenses. The man you know as Duke Sterling Hartley, heir to Ashford Manor and Lord Pemberton's fortune, is in fact a usurper who has spent the last 2 years systematically destroying evidence of his predecessor's true wishes." Boom. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Miss Charlotte Ashford pressed forward, her beautiful face twisted with confusion and anger. "Nicholas, what are you saying? Have you lost your senses?" "On the contrary, sister, I have finally recovered them." The Earl's gaze swept across the assembled aristocracy, ensuring every person heard his next words. 3 years ago, Lord Pemberton summoned me to London in my capacity as both a solicitor and a family friend. He was gravely ill and wished to ensure his affairs were in order. What he revealed to me was a truth that he had kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. A truth that Duke Hartley discovered and has been desperately trying to conceal. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Why was the Earl speaking of Lord Pemberton's testament? What did any of this have to do with her false accusation? Duke Hartley's hand had moved to grip the back of a nearby chair, his knuckles white with tension. "You are making wild accusations without proof." "I have proof." Earl Ashford held up the document. "This is Lord Pemberton's true will, properly witnessed and legally binding, which he entrusted to my keeping precisely because he feared what might happen if his nephew learned its contents before his death. And do you know what this will state, ladies and gentlemen? It states that Sterling Hartley is not the legitimate heir to Ashford Manor." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Voices rose in shock and disbelief. Fans fluttered with increased agitation. Gentlemen pressed forward, demanding to see the document. Through it all, Duke Hartley stood motionless, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to understand. If Duke Hartley was not the heir, then who was? And what did any of this have to do with her? Earl Ashford raised his hand, calling for silence. When the room had quieted enough to hear him, he continued, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. Lord Pemberton had a daughter. She was born in 1856, the result of a brief but genuine love affair with a woman of gentle birth who served in his household. When the girl's mother died in childbirth, Lord Pemberton faced a choice. He could acknowledge the child publicly, subjecting her to a life of scandal and social ostracism, or he could protect her by raising her quietly within his household, ensuring she was cared for while hiding her true identity. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her feet. No, it could not be. It was impossible. That daughter, the Earl continued, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the crowded room, was Martha Winters, who served as head housekeeper of Ashford Manor until her death 3 years ago. And Martha Winters had a daughter of her own, born in this very manor 18 years ago. The world tilted sideways. Eleanor heard a high ringing in her ears, saw the faces around her swimming in and out of focus. This could not be real. It had to be another nightmare layered upon the first. Eleanor Winters, Earl Ashford said gently, is Lord Pemberton's granddaughter and his only living blood relative. According to his true will, she is the rightful heir to Ashford Manor, its lands, its fortunes, and the title that accompanies them. Eleanor's legs finally gave way. She would have fallen if Grace had not suddenly appeared at her side, materializing from the crowd of servants who had gathered in the doorway, supporting her friend with fierce strength. Lies! Duke Hartley's voice cut through the stunned silence like broken glass. These are elaborate lies designed to defraud the rightful heir. This girl is a common servant, nothing more. This girl, Earl Ashford corrected with steel in his voice, is Lady Eleanor Pemberton. And you, sir, have known this truth for over a year. You discovered it while going through your uncle's private papers, and you have spent every day since attempting to destroy the evidence and eliminate the threat she posed to your false inheritance. He turned back to the crowd, his expression grave. Lord Pemberton entrusted me with copies of all relevant documentation, the record of Martha Winter's true parentage, witness statements from those who knew the truth, and most importantly, his clearly stated wishes that his granddaughter inherit everything upon his death. What I did not realize until recently was that Duke Hartley had discovered this secret and was actively working against it. Then why did you not come forward sooner? Someone in the crowd demanded. If you have known this truth for 3 years, why reveal it only now? Because Lord Pemberton made me swear an oath not to reveal his daughter's identity or his granddaughter's birthright until after his death. He feared the scandal would destroy them both while he still lived to protect them. He wanted them to have the full weight of his will and testament behind them before facing the judgment of society. I have honored that oath, waiting for word of his passing before executing the terms of his will. Eleanor finally found her voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. Lord Pemberton is dead? Earl Ashford's expression softened with sympathy. He passed 3 days ago, Miss Winters. I'm deeply sorry. The Duke suppressed the news, likely hoping to have more time to complete his scheme against you. I came tonight specifically to prevent him from succeeding. Duke Hartley laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. You expect these people to believe this fantastical tale, that a housemaid is actually an heiress? It is absurd. Is it? The Earl's voice remained calm but implacable. Or is it merely inconvenient for you? Tell me, Your Grace, how did Miss Ashford's bracelet come to be in Eleanor's pocket? Because I suspect if we examine the matter closely, we will find that you placed it there yourself, creating a convenient reason to have her arrested and removed from the picture before Lord Pemberton's death could be announced and his true will executed. Miss Charlotte Ashford gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Sterling, tell me this is not true. Tell me you did not involve me in such a scheme. Of course it is not true. But the Duke's voice lacked conviction, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal seeking escape. Earl Ashford pressed his advantage. I have witnesses who will testify to seeing you near the servants' quarters this evening, at a time when you should have been greeting guests. I have statements from household staff about your unusual interest in Eleanor over the past weeks, your efforts to arrange her presence here tonight, despite her inexperience with formal service. Every piece of evidence points to a calculated plan to frame her for theft and have her removed from the household before she could learn of her true inheritance. The crowd had turned, their expressions shifting from shock to horror to growing anger at Duke Hartley. The aristocracy might be willing to overlook many things, but being made complicit in a conspiracy to defraud a rightful heir crossed a line even they could not ignore. This is preposterous, Duke Hartley tried once more, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. I am the nephew, the acknowledged heir. You are a distant cousin, Earl Ashford corrected. A relation by marriage, not blood. Lord Pemberton's will is explicit. In the presence of a direct blood descendant, all other claims are void. Eleanor Winters, Lady Eleanor Pemberton, is the rightful heir to everything you have claimed as your own. Eleanor felt Grace's arms around her, heard her friends' whispered words of amazement and support, but she could not quite process any of it. How could her entire identity have changed in the span of minutes? How could she be anything other than what she had always been, a servant, insignificant, invisible? But as she looked around the ballroom at the faces staring at her with new eyes, as she felt the weight of the Earl's revelations settling over her like a mantle she had never asked to wear, Eleanor understood that her old life had ended the moment Duke Hartley had accused her of theft. There was no going back to invisibility, no returning to the safety of her old identity. The Earl crossed to where she stood, offering his hand with the same respect he would show any lady of quality. "Lady Eleanor, I know this must be overwhelming. I have arranged rooms for you at my estate in town, a safe place where you can rest and recover from this ordeal while we sort out the legal matters. If you will permit me, I will escort you there now, away from this chaos." "Oh." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern, genuine respect, as though he truly saw her as a person of worth rather than a pawn in someone else's game. It was so different from Duke Hartley's cold assessment that she felt something break loose inside her chest, some tight knot of fear that had lived there all her life. "Yes," she whispered. "Please, I want to leave here." "Grace must come too," Eleanor added, finding strength in her voice. "I will not leave without her." "Of course. Any companions you wish will be welcome." As Earl Ashford led Eleanor and Grace toward the ballroom doors, Duke Hartley made one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. "You have not heard the last of this. I will contest the will. I will prove this is all an elaborate fraud." The Earl paused, looking back over his shoulder. "By all means, contest it. Drag this matter through the courts if you wish. But I should warn you that in addition to witnesses and documentation proving Lady Eleanor's parentage, I also possess evidence of your attempts to destroy Lord Pemberton's papers, forge alternate documents, and conspire to commit fraud. If you pursue this battle, I will ensure that you face criminal charges as well as losing your false inheritance. The choice is yours." Duke Hartley said nothing more, his face a study in impotent rage. The journey through the manor was a blur for Eleanor. Servants lined the corridors, their faces showing everything from shock to joy to confusion. Mrs. Cooper stood near the main entrance, tears streaming down her weathered face as she curtsied deeply to Eleanor, a gesture that felt so wrong that Eleanor nearly protested before Grace squeezed her hand in warning. Outside, a fine carriage waited, the Earl's crest emblazoned on its door. As Eleanor settled into the plush interior, breathing in the scent of leather and privilege that had always belonged to other people, she felt reality finally beginning to penetrate the shock that had insulated her. She was not who she had thought she was. Everything she had believed about herself, about her place in the world, had been a carefully constructed fiction designed to protect her. Her mother had known the truth and carried it to her grave. Lord Pemberton, a man she had served but never truly known, had been her grandfather, had loved her enough to ensure her future, even knowing the scandal it might cause. "I do not know how to be what you say I am," Eleanor said suddenly, her voice small in the darkness of the carriage. "I have spent my entire life learning to be invisible, to be less than. How can I possibly become more than—" Earl Nicholas Ashford, sitting across from her, leaned forward so she could see his face in the dim light filtering through the carriage windows. "You do not have to become anything, Lady Eleanor. You simply have to learn to be yourself without the weight of false limitations crushing you. The rest will come with time." "Why did you help me?" Eleanor asked. "You do not know me. Why risk yourself against Duke Hartley?" "Because I made a promise to Lord Pemberton to see his wishes honored, and because what Duke Hartley attempted tonight was an abomination that I could not allow to stand unchallenged. Beyond that—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Perhaps because I see in you something worth protecting, a spirit that has been constrained but not broken. That seems worthy of aid." Grace, sitting beside Eleanor, spoke up for the first time since entering the carriage. "What happens now, Lord Ashford?" "Now we give Lady Eleanor time to process this upheaval. Tomorrow we will begin the practical matters, transferring the estate into her control, dealing with Duke Hartley's inevitable legal challenges, introducing her properly to society. But tonight, we simply provide her safety and rest. The carriage rolled through the darkness, carrying Eleanor away from the only life she had ever known toward a future she could not begin to imagine. She looked out the window at the familiar countryside passing by, seeing it with new eyes. This land, these fields and forests, belonged to her now. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing, but Grace's hand remained firm in hers, and Earl Ashford's steady presence across the carriage provided an anchor in the chaos. Eleanor was not alone in this transformation. She had allies, perhaps even friends, though she was not yet ready to use such a presumptuous word for an earl who had saved her from destruction. As the lights of Ashford Manor faded behind them and new lights appeared ahead marking the Earl's estate, Eleanor made a silent vow. She would honour her grandfather's wishes. She would learn to be Lady Eleanor Pemberton, not because she desired wealth or position, but because Lord Pemberton had believed she deserved them. She would not let his faith in her be misplaced. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage. She was, after all, no longer invisible. The morning sun streaming through tall windows woke Eleanor from restless dreams, where she was simultaneously a servant and a lady, belonging fully to neither world. For several disorienting moments she could not remember where she was, and then the memories of the previous night crashed over her like a cold wave. The accusation, the humiliation, Earl Ashford's revelation, the truth about her heritage laid bare before a ballroom full of witnesses. She sat up in the enormous four-poster bed, taking in her surroundings with wonder tinged by lingering disbelief. The guest chamber in Earl Ashford's estate was larger than the entire servants' quarters at Ashford Manor, decorated in soft blues and creams that reminded Eleanor of morning sky. Original paintings adorned the walls. A thick Aubusson carpet covered the floor. The furniture was elegant without being ostentatious, chosen for beauty and comfort rather than merely to display wealth. A soft knock at the door preceded Grace's entrance, carrying a breakfast tray that released the enticing aromas of fresh bread, chocolate, and strawberries. "Good morning, Lady Eleanor," Grace said, her tone mixing affection with the formal address that still felt bizarre to Eleanor's ears. "I hope you slept at least a little. You certainly deserve rest after last night's ordeal." "Please do not call me that," Eleanor begged. "Not you, Grace. I cannot bear it from my only friend." Grace set the tray down and embraced Eleanor fiercely. "You are still Ellie to me, always. But to the rest of the world, you must be Lady Eleanor now. It is what your grandfather wished, and it is what will protect you from people like Duke Hartley." They ate breakfast together, Grace filling Eleanor in on the household gossip she had gathered from the Earl's servants. News of the previous night's revelation was spreading through the county like wildfire. Messengers had been dispatched in all directions, carrying word of the scandal. By noon, every aristocratic family within 50 miles would know that Ashford Manor had a new mistress, and that Duke Sterling Hartley's claim had been exposed as fraudulent. "What will happen to him?" Eleanor asked. "Will he truly face criminal charges?" "That depends on whether he is foolish enough to contest the will," Grace replied. "Earl Ashford's sister, Miss Charlotte, apparently confronted him after we left. Several servants overheard her demanding to know if he had used her in his scheme. They say she was absolutely furious." Eleanor felt a twinge of sympathy despite everything. Charlotte Ashford had seemed complicit in the humiliation, but perhaps she had been another pawn in the Duke's game, used without her full understanding. A more formal knock interrupted their conversation. A maid entered, curtsying deeply before speaking. "Lady Eleanor, Earl Ashford requests the honour of your presence in the drawing-room at your convenience. He has several matters to discuss regarding your new position, and there are visitors who wish to meet you." "Visitors already?" Eleanor's stomach clenched with anxiety. "What visitors?" "I believe they are representatives from various county families, my lady, come to pay their respects to the new mistress of Ashford Manor." After the maid departed, Grace helped Eleanor dress in one of the gowns that had been hastily prepared the previous evening. It was a simple day dress of pale green muslin, far finer than anything Eleanor had ever worn, but modest compared to the elaborate fashions favored by women like Charlotte Ashford. Grace arranged Eleanor's hair in a style that was elegant, but not ostentatious, pulling it back from her face while allowing soft curls to frame her features. "You look every inch a lady," Grace pronounced, stepping back to admire her work. "Beautiful and dignified. Your grandfather would be proud." Eleanor studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the young woman who stared back. The transformation was not merely external. Something in her bearing had changed overnight, a subtle straightening of the spine, a new awareness in her eyes. She was no longer trying to make herself invisible. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The drawing room of Earl Ashford's estate was an elegant space decorated in cream and gold, with tall windows overlooking manicured gardens. Earl Nicholas Ashford stood near the fireplace, speaking quietly with an elderly gentleman who turned as Eleanor entered. Both men bowed, a gesture of respect that still felt impossibly wrong directed at her. "Lady Eleanor, good morning," the Earl greeted her warmly. "I trust you rested adequately after last night's distressing events, as well as could be expected, my lord. Thank you for your hospitality." "It is my honor. Allow me to introduce Mr. Hargreaves, Lord Pemberton's, your grandfather's, primary solicitor. He has brought the relevant documents regarding your inheritance, which we should review at your earliest convenience." Hargreaves was a dignified man in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating grey eyes, that studied Eleanor with professional assessment that gradually warmed to approval. "Lady Eleanor, I am honored to finally meet you. Your grandfather spoke of you often in our private consultations, though I confess I did not fully understand the situation until recently. He was determined to ensure your future, even knowing the complications it might create. He never acknowledged me while he lived," Eleanor said quietly. "I served in his household for years, and he never spoke to me directly. How am I to believe he cared at all?" Mr. Hargreaves exchanged a glance with Earl Ashford before responding. "Your grandfather was bound by his own choices, Lady Eleanor. He feared that acknowledging you publicly would subject you to cruel scrutiny and scandal. He believed that providing for you secretly, ensuring you had a future secured by law and fortune, was the most loving course available to him, given the circumstances of your birth. Perhaps he was right, perhaps wrong, but his intentions were genuine." The solicitor opened his leather case and withdrew several documents. "Your grandfather's estate is substantial. In addition to Ashford Manor and its lands, there are investments, properties in London, and financial assets that produce considerable annual income. All of it now belongs to you, administered through trustees until you reach the age of majority or marry, whichever comes first." Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was being described. "I know nothing about managing estates or investments. I can barely read beyond what my mother taught me in secret. How am I supposed to oversee all of this?" "You will learn," Earl Ashford said firmly, crossing to sit near her, "and you will have advisers to guide you. Mr. Hargreaves, myself, and others who served your grandfather faithfully. You are not expected to manage everything alone, Lady Eleanor. That is what trustees and stewards are for." "But why you?" Eleanor looked at the Earl directly, the question that had been burning in her mind finally escaping. "Why would Lord Pemberton choose you as executor of his will? What connection do you have to him?" Nicholas Ashford's expression softened with memory. "Your grandfather and my father were close friends in their youth. When my father died and left me orphaned at 15, Lord Pemberton became my guardian, saw to my education, helped me navigate the responsibilities of my inherited title. He was as much a father to me as my own had been. When he needed someone trustworthy to execute his final wishes, someone who could stand against Duke Hartley's inevitable challenge, he knew I would honor my debt to him. And so you have." Eleanor said softly. "You saved me from disgrace and worse. I owe you everything. You owe me nothing except the courtesy of allowing me to fulfill my promise to a man I deeply respected. Beyond that, Lady Eleanor, you owe the world only what you choose to give it." Before Eleanor could respond, the butler appeared in the doorway. "My lord, the visitors have arrived. Shall I show them in?" Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap, but she nodded. There was no avoiding this. If she was to claim her inheritance, she had to face society's judgment. The visitors entered in a procession that felt choreographed. Lord and Lady Whitmore, the elderly couple who owned the neighbouring estate, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell, prominent members of the local gentry, Sir Geoffrey Thornton and his wife, and several others whose names blurred together in Eleanor's anxious mind. They all offered stiff bows and curtsies, their expressions ranging from genuine curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Lady Whitmore took the lead, her aristocratic features arranged in an expression of cool assessment. "Lady Eleanor, we felt it necessary to call upon you and ascertain the truth of last night's remarkable claims. You will understand, I trust, that such an extraordinary situation demands verification." "Of course, Lady Whitmore," Eleanor replied, managing to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I understand perfectly. Until yesterday evening, I believed myself to be nothing more than a housemaid. This revelation has been as shocking to me as it must be to you." "Quite," Lady Whitmore sniffed. "And yet you expect us to accept that you are now Lady Pemberton, mistress of one of the county's greatest estates, based solely on the word of one man and some dusty documents." Earl Ashford stepped forward, his voice polite but edged with steel. "The documents in question are witnessed, legally binding, and confirmed by multiple sources, including Lord Pemberton's own hand. I would be happy to provide you with copies for your own examination, Lady Whitmore. Unless, of course, you are suggesting that Lord Pemberton was incompetent to manage his own affairs." Lady Whitmore's eyes flashed with irritation, but she subsided. To question Lord Pemberton's judgment directly would be a grave insult. Lord Whitmore cleared his throat. "The question is not the validity of the documents, but rather the suitability of their beneficiary. This girl, forgive me, Lady Eleanor, has been raised as a servant. She has no education in the responsibilities of managing an estate or moving in society. How can she possibly fulfill the duties her new position demands? With the same determination and intelligence that allowed her to thrive, despite being denied the advantages of her birth," Earl Ashford replied. "Lady Eleanor will have tutors, advisors, and time to learn what she needs to know. She is young, adaptable, and far more capable than you give her credit for." "How very gallant of you, Lord Ashford," Mrs. Blackwell interjected, her tone suggesting the opposite of the compliment her words implied. "One might almost think you had a personal interest in defending this girl's claim." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the insinuation, but before she could form a response, Earl Ashford laughed, a genuine sound free of mockery. "My interest, madam, is in seeing justice done and a friend's final wishes honoured. If you find that suspicious, I suggest you examine your own assumptions about what motivates people in positions of responsibility." The tension in the room had thickened considerably when the door opened once more, admitting an unexpected visitor whose arrival changed the entire atmosphere. Charlotte Ashford entered with the confidence of someone who belonged in every elegant space she occupied. Her gown was impeccable, her hair perfectly arranged, her bearing that of a woman who had never questioned her place in the world. But there were shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night, and her expression held something Eleanor had not seen the previous evening, genuine uncertainty. "Lady Eleanor," Charlotte said, offering a curtsy that was technically perfect, but seemed to cost her considerable effort. "I hope you will forgive the intrusion. I felt I must speak with you." "Miss Ashford," Eleanor replied carefully. "You are welcome here, though I confess I am surprised to see you." Charlotte glanced around at the other visitors, then back to Eleanor. "What I have to say should perhaps be said privately. But perhaps it is better spoken before witnesses. I owe you an apology, Lady Eleanor. I was complicit in Duke Hartley's scheme, though I did not fully understand its true nature until last night. And the room fell silent, everyone straining to hear this unexpected confession. Sterling, Duke Hartley, told me that you had been flirting with him inappropriately, attempting to use your position as a servant to gain his attention and favor. He said he needed to teach you a lesson, to put you in your place before you did something truly scandalous. I allowed him to use my bracelet in his plan because I believed I was helping to maintain proper social boundaries. Charlotte's voice wavered slightly, but she continued, I did not know the truth about your identity. I did not know he was attempting to destroy evidence of your rightful inheritance. Had I known, I would never have participated. I am deeply ashamed of my role in your humiliation. Eleanor studied Charlotte's face, searching for deception and finding only what appeared to be genuine remorse. Why are you telling me this now? Because my brother explained to me what Duke Hartley truly was attempting. Because I spent the night realizing how easily I was manipulated, how willing I was to believe the worst of someone based solely on their station in life. Because I would like to think that I am better than that, though last night proved otherwise. Charlotte took a step closer, her eyes meeting Eleanor's directly. I know I have no right to ask your forgiveness, but I am asking nonetheless, and I am offering whatever assistance I can provide as you navigate your new position. You will need allies who understand society's expectations, Lady Eleanor. I would like to be one of them, if you will permit it. Eleanor felt the weight of everyone's attention pressing down on her. This was a test, she realized. Her response to Charlotte's apology would tell these aristocrats much about her character, about whether she could rise above her servant's origins to exercise the judgment and grace expected of her new station. She stood, moving across the room until she stood directly before Charlotte. The other woman was several inches taller, dressed far more elegantly, possessed of every advantage of birth and education, but Eleanor no longer felt small in her presence. Miss Ashford, I accept your apology. We were both manipulated by Duke Hartley, both used as pieces in his scheme. I choose to believe that you acted from ignorance rather than malice. If you are sincere in your offer of assistance, then I would welcome it. I need friends who understand this world I must now inhabit. Charlotte's expression flooded with relief. She grasped Eleanor's hands in an impulsive gesture that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. Thank you. You are far more generous than I deserve. The other visitors exchanged glances, and Eleanor could practically see their calculations shifting. If Charlotte Ashford, daughter of an Earl, was willing to acknowledge Eleanor and offer her friendship, then perhaps this girl's claim truly was legitimate. Perhaps she truly was worthy of the position fate had thrust upon her. Lady Whitmore rose, her expression still cool but no longer quite so dismissive. Lady Eleanor, I believe I speak for all of us when I say that this situation will require considerable adjustment for everyone involved. However, if Lord Pemberton's wishes were truly as Earl Ashford has stated, then I suppose we must welcome you to your rightful place in county society. It was not exactly a warm endorsement, but Eleanor recognized it for the victory it was. Thank you, Lady Whitmore. I hope in time to prove myself worthy of your acceptance. The visitors departed shortly after, leaving Eleanor alone with Earl Ashford, Charlotte, and Grace, who had remained quietly in the background throughout the entire encounter. You handled that beautifully, Nicholas said, approval clear in his voice. They came expecting to find a trembling servant girl, overwhelmed by her new circumstances. Instead, they found a young woman capable of grace under pressure. I felt like I was going to be sick the entire time, Eleanor admitted. That is what courage is, Charlotte said softly, acting despite fear, not in the absence of it. You have more strength than you realize, Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor? It seems absurd to stand on formality after everything that has happened. Please do. And may I call you Charlotte? I would be honored. Over the following days, Eleanor's life transformed at a pace that left her breathless. Under Nicholas Ashford's guidance and Charlotte's patient instruction, she began learning the countless skills and knowledge required of a lady of quality. There were lessons in proper etiquette, in managing household accounts, in reading and writing beyond the basic level her mother had taught her. There were fittings for appropriate clothing, meetings with various estate managers and solicitors, introductions to the complex web of social obligations and expectations that governed aristocratic life. Through it all, Grace remained her constant companion, refusing to be relegated to servant status despite Eleanor's elevated position. "I do not care what title you carry," Grace said firmly, when Eleanor suggested she should perhaps maintain more proper distance. "You are my friend, and I will stand beside you whatever comes. Besides, you need someone who knew you before all this, someone who will tell you when you are being ridiculous." Nicholas Ashford visited daily, overseeing Eleanor's education with the dedication of a professor with a prized student. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his visits, not merely because he provided guidance in practical matters, but because he treated her as an intellectual equal, despite her lack of formal education. Their conversations ranged across topics she had never been permitted to explore as a servant: history, philosophy, the political debates shaping modern England. "You have a sharp mind," Nicholas observed one afternoon, as they reviewed documents related to Ashford Manor's tenant farmers. "Your mother must have been an excellent teacher to give you such a foundation, despite the limitations of your circumstances." "She was," Eleanor agreed softly. "I miss her terribly. I wish she could have seen this, could have told me the truth herself. Perhaps she wanted to. Perhaps she feared you would be safer not knowing until the proper time." Nicholas set down his papers, studying Eleanor with an expression she could not quite read. "Tell me, Eleanor, how do you feel about all of this now that the initial shock has passed? Do you resent your grandfather for keeping you in ignorance? Do you wish you could return to your old life?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I do not know if resent is the right word. I am angry, yes, that he never acknowledged me, that he watched me scrub floors and empty chamber pots, knowing I was his blood. But I also understand, I think, that he was trapped by choices made long before I was born. As for my old life—" She paused, surprised by the certainty in her voice when she continued. "No, I do not wish to return to invisibility, to being less than. I am terrified of the responsibilities I now carry, but I would not trade them for the false safety of my previous existence." "Good," Nicholas said quietly, "because I believe you are going to do remarkable things, Lady Eleanor Pemberton. You are going to show all of them what true nobility looks like, the kind that has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with character." The warmth in his eyes as he spoke made Eleanor's breath catch. She looked away quickly, confused by the flutter of feeling in her chest. Nicholas Ashford was her mentor, her guardian in all but legal title. It would be inappropriate to feel anything more toward him, regardless of what her treacherous heart might suggest. But as the days passed and her lessons continued, Eleanor found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way her pulse quickened when Nicholas smiled at her, the way his presence made her feel both safe and energized. She tried to dismiss these feelings as gratitude mixed with the vulnerability of her situation, but her heart refused to be so easily reasoned with. Charlotte noticed, of course. One afternoon, as they worked on Eleanor's posture and deportment, Charlotte suddenly stopped mid-instruction and fixed Eleanor with a knowing look. "You care for my brother." Eleanor felt her face flame with heat. "I am grateful to him for all he has done." "That is not what I said. I said you care for him, as in your feelings extend beyond mere gratitude." Charlotte's expression was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "Does he know?" "There is nothing to know. Earl Ashford is my guardian and advisor. Any other feelings would be entirely inappropriate." "Inappropriate," Charlotte repeated, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Eleanor, you are now a lady of considerable fortune and impeccable lineage, even if society still whispers about the circumstances. My brother is an earl, yes, but one of modest fortune whose estate requires careful management. From a practical standpoint, you would be considered an excellent match for him, perhaps even a match above his station. The idea was so absurd that Eleanor actually laughed. You cannot be serious. I have been a lady for less than 2 weeks. I still barely know which fork to use at dinner. And yet you carry yourself with more natural dignity than women who have spent decades in society. You have intelligence, courage, and a good heart. Those qualities matter far more than knowing the proper order of cutlery. Charlotte's expression turned serious. I am not suggesting you declare your feelings or do anything improper. I am simply saying that you should not dismiss the possibility of happiness simply because you think yourself unworthy. My brother has been alone since his fiancée died 5 years ago. He has buried himself in work and duty, refusing to consider his own happiness. Perhaps you could be the person who reminds him that life contains more than obligation. Eleanor's chest tightened at the mention of a dead fiancé, a tragedy in Nicholas's past she had not known about. What happened to her? Influenza. It swept through London that winter and took her within days. Nicholas was devastated. I think part of him died with her. Until recently, I had not seen genuine light in his eyes when he spoke to anyone. But when he speaks to you, Eleanor, I see something awakening in him again. And I cannot help but hope that perhaps you both might find healing in each other's company. Before Eleanor could respond, Nicholas himself appeared in the doorway, holding a letter that bore an official-looking seal. Ladies, I'm afraid I must interrupt your lesson. Eleanor, there is news from London. Duke Hartley has officially filed a challenge to your inheritance. The matter will be heard before the Court of Chancery next month. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Will I have to testify? Yes. And you will face examination from Duke Hartley's solicitors who will attempt to prove you are unworthy of your inheritance. It will not be pleasant. Then we shall prepare her, Charlotte said firmly, moving to stand beside Eleanor in a gesture of solidarity. We will ensure she is ready for whatever those vultures attempt. Nicholas smiled, genuine warmth crossing his features. With allies like you both, I almost pity Duke Hartley. He has no idea what he has set in motion. The journey to London was Eleanor's first experience of travel beyond the familiar boundaries of her county. She sat in Nicholas's well-appointed carriage with Grace beside her and Charlotte across from them, watching the English countryside roll past the windows with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Every mile that passed brought them closer to the Court of Chancery, where Duke Sterling Hartley would attempt to strip away her newfound identity and return her to the invisibility of servitude. "Stop worrying your hands," Charlotte said gently, reaching across to still Eleanor's nervous fingers. "You will wear holes in your gloves before we even arrive at our destination. I cannot help it. What if the court decides against me? What if they believe Duke Hartley's arguments over the evidence? Then they would be fools," Nicholas said from where he sat beside his sister. "And while the Court of Chancery contains many flaws, outright foolishness is rarely one of them. The evidence is overwhelming in your favor, Eleanor. Lord Pemberton's will is legally sound. The documents proving your lineage are authenticated, and we have testimony from multiple sources confirming the truth. Duke Hartley's only argument is that your status as a former servant makes you unworthy of inheritance, which is not a legal position, but a social prejudice. Social prejudice that many in that courtroom will share," Eleanor pointed out. "Perhaps. But the law is the law, regardless of personal feelings. That is why we have courts, rather than simply allowing the powerful to dictate outcomes based on their preferences." London revealed itself gradually as they drew closer. First outlying villages that had been absorbed into the growing metropolis, then increasingly dense neighborhoods of buildings that rose higher than anything Eleanor had seen before, and finally the heart of the city itself, where cobblestone streets teemed with carriages, horses, pedestrians, and street vendors calling their wares in voices that competed with the general roar of urban life. Eleanor pressed her face to the carriage window, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and energy of it all. So many people. How does anyone find their way through such chaos? You grow accustomed to it, Charlotte assured her. London has its own rhythm once you learn to perceive it, and our destination is in one of the more refined areas, away from the worst of the commercial districts. They arrived at a townhouse in Mayfair, an elegant address in one of London's most fashionable neighbourhoods. Nicholas had arranged for them to stay in a property he kept for his infrequent visits to the capital. It was smaller than either Ashford Manor or his country estate, but decorated with impeccable taste that spoke of old wealth maintained through careful stewardship rather than ostentatious display. Over the following days before the hearing, Nicholas drilled Eleanor relentlessly in the details of her case. She memorized dates, names, legal precedents, and the complicated lineage that established her claim. Charlotte worked on her presentation, ensuring she would appear before the court as a lady of quality rather than an uncertain girl pretending to a station beyond her reach. "Remember that your bearing tells a story before you speak a single word," Charlotte instructed, as they practiced Eleanor's entrance and posture. "Stand straight, but not rigid. Meet the judge's eyes directly, but do not stare in challenge. Speak clearly and firmly, without raising your voice or showing excessive emotion. You must project calm confidence, even if you feel anything but calm inside." "I feel like I'm learning to perform in a play," Eleanor admitted. "In a sense, you are. Society is theatre, Eleanor, and we are all playing roles. The key is to play yours well enough that people accept the performance as reality." Grace, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, spoke up. "What a sad view of the world. Can people not simply be honest about who they are? Not if who they are conflicts with who they are expected to be," Charlotte replied with surprising gentleness. "I do not defend the system, Grace. I merely explain how it operates. Eleanor must navigate these waters successfully if she is to keep what is rightfully hers." The evening before the hearing, Nicholas found Eleanor alone in the townhouse library, staring at a book without really seeing the words on the page. He settled into the chair beside hers, his presence a comfort she had come to depend upon, perhaps more than was wise. "Are you prepared?" he asked quietly. "As prepared as I can be, I suppose, though I fear preparation means little when the outcome depends on the prejudices of men who have already decided I am unworthy. Then we shall change their minds. Eleanor, I need you to understand something. Regardless of what happens tomorrow, regardless of the court's decision, you have already proven yourself worthy 100 times over. The way you have faced these challenges, the grace you have shown even to those who wronged you, the determination you have demonstrated in learning everything required of your new station, these things speak to your character far more clearly than any legal document." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why do you have such faith in me? You barely know me beyond a few weeks of acquaintance." Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire burning in the grate. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had not heard before. "Because you remind me that goodness still exists in the world, Eleanor. For years after Catherine, my fiancée, died, I moved through my responsibilities like a ghost, performing what duty demanded, but feeling nothing beyond grief and emptiness. When your grandfather asked me to be executor of his will, to protect his granddaughter and see his wishes fulfilled, I agreed out of obligation to an old friend. I did not expect to actually care about the outcome beyond the satisfaction of legal victory." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made Eleanor's breath catch. "But then I met you. I saw your courage in the face of Duke Hartley's cruelty. I watched you transform yourself from someone trained to be invisible into a woman who faces down aristocrats without flinching. I listened to your questions and witnessed your quick intelligence despite having been denied education. And I realized that somewhere in the process of protecting you, I had begun to care about you specifically, not merely as a responsibility, but as a person I deeply admire." Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she felt certain Nicholas must be able to hear it. "My lord, Nicholas, please. When we are private, simply Nicholas. Nicholas, she repeated softly, tasting his name in her mouth. I do not know what to say. You have been my salvation, my teacher, my protector. My feelings toward you are complicated by gratitude and dependency. How can I trust that what I feel is genuine and not merely the result of my circumstances? A fair question, and one I cannot answer for you. I only know that when you smile, my day brightens. When you struggle with some new concept and then suddenly grasp it, I feel pride as though I had accomplished something myself. When I imagine you returning to Ashford Manor and I to my estate, the separation feels like a physical ache. He reached out, taking her hand gently. I do not expect you to return these feelings, Eleanor. The distance between guardian and ward is substantial, and I would never abuse the trust placed in me. But after tomorrow, after the hearing, you will no longer be under my legal protection. You will be free to make your own choices, and I wanted you to know that among those choices, should you wish it, could be the choice of allowing me to court you properly. Eleanor felt as though her entire being was suspended between heartbeats, hovering in a moment that would determine the shape of her future. Nicholas Ashford was offering her not merely his protection or friendship, but the possibility of genuine partnership, of building a life together based on mutual respect and growing affection. I would like that, she whispered, very much. You have become essential to me in ways I barely understand. When I'm confused or afraid, I seek your presence. When I learn something new, my first thought is to share it with you. If these feelings are merely gratitude, then I am grateful beyond measure. But I hope, they might be something more. Nicholas raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's entire body. Then we shall see what tomorrow brings, and afterward we shall explore what might grow between us, free from the complications of legal guardianship and courtroom drama. He left her shortly after, maintaining the propriety that his position demanded, but Eleanor sat in the library for another hour, her hand still tingling from his kiss, her heart singing with possibility. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them knowing that she was not alone, that someone saw her not as a problem to be solved or a pawn to be moved, but as a woman worthy of respect and perhaps love. The Court of Chancery convened in a building of intimidating grandeur, all stone pillars and soaring ceilings that made the humans within seem small and insignificant. Eleanor entered with Nicholas on one side and Charlotte on the other, Grace following close behind in the public gallery. She wore a dress of deep blue that Charlotte had helped her select, elegant but not ostentatious, projecting quiet confidence and dignity. Duke Sterling Hartley sat at the opposing counsel's table with his solicitors, his face a mask of cold disdain. When his eyes met Eleanor's across the courtroom, she saw in them such concentrated hatred that she nearly faltered. But Charlotte's hand tightened on her arm in support, and Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. The panel of 3 judges entered, elderly men in their elaborate robes and wigs, their expressions revealing nothing of their thoughts. The lead judge, Lord Justice Pembroke, called the proceedings to order with a bang of his gavel that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. We are gathered to hear the matter of Hartley versus Pemberton regarding the disputed inheritance of Ashford Manor and its associated properties. The petitioner, Duke Sterling Hartley, claims that the will of the late Lord Pemberton is invalid due to undue influence, and that the named heir, Miss Eleanor Winters, is unsuitable to inherit based on her status and upbringing. The respondent disputes these claims. We shall hear arguments from both parties. Duke Hartley's solicitor, a pinched-faced man named Wickham, rose to present the case for invalidating Lord Pemberton's will. His arguments focused on 2 main points. First, that Eleanor's status as a servant and illegitimate granddaughter made her unsuitable for inheriting a noble estate, and second, that Lord Pemberton must have been mentally compromised when he made his will, as no rational man would leave his fortune to an uneducated housemaid over his legitimate nephew. "My lords," Wickham argued, his voice dripping with disdain, "we ask the court to consider the practical realities of this situation. Miss Winters, despite her claimed bloodline, was raised as a servant. She can barely read or write. She has no understanding of estate management, no education in the responsibilities required of her claimed station. To place such a fortune in her hands would be to invite disaster for the tenants and workers who depend on Ashford Manor for their livelihoods." When it was Nicholas's turn to argue, he rose with calm authority that commanded the courtroom's attention. "My lords, the petitioner's arguments rest on social prejudice rather than legal foundation. Lord Pemberton's will is entirely valid under law. It was properly witnessed, executed while he was demonstrably of sound mind, and based on his deliberate choice to provide for his only blood descendant. The fact that circumstances required Miss Winters to be raised in service rather than acknowledged openly does not negate her bloodline or her legal right to inherit." He presented the documentation systematically, Lord Pemberton's private papers confirming Martha Winters' true parentage, witness statements from those who had known the truth, medical records proving Lord Pemberton's mental competence when he executed his will, and most compellingly Lord Pemberton's own written explanation of his choices. Lord Pemberton was constrained by decisions made decades ago, decisions he came to regret but could not undo without destroying the people he loved, Nicholas explained, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. He chose to protect his daughter and granddaughter through legal means rather than social acknowledgement. That choice may have been difficult, even painful, but it was his right as the owner of his estate and his person. This court cannot invalidate a legally sound will simply because some find its terms socially uncomfortable. When Eleanor was called to testify, she approached the witness box with her heart pounding, but her bearing steady. Charlotte's training held firm as she faced the panel of judges, meeting their eyes without challenge but without submission. Wickham's cross-examination was brutal, designed to expose her as an ignorant fraud, unworthy of her claimed inheritance. "Miss Winters, can you explain the principles of estate management as they relate to agricultural tenancies?" "I can explain them as well as any lady of my age might be expected to know them, having received several weeks of intensive education on the subject from qualified advisors. If you are asking whether I possess expertise equivalent to a land steward with 30 years' experience, obviously I do not. But neither would any young woman inheriting an estate, regardless of her birth circumstances. Can you read Latin? No. Can you scrub a floor, Mr. Wickham? We all possess different skills based on our education and experience." A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the courtroom at her response. Wickham's face flushed with anger. "Do you truly expect us to believe that you are capable of managing one of England's greatest states when you were emptying chamber pots mere weeks ago? I expect you to believe that I am capable of learning what I need to know, just as any heir would learn when assuming new responsibilities. My grandfather believed in my potential enough to leave me his fortune. I intend to honor his faith in me by proving him correct." Duke Hartley's turn to testify revealed the weakness in his position. Under Nicholas's questioning, he was forced to admit that he had destroyed correspondence between Lord Pemberton and Eleanor's mother, that he had concealed Lord Pemberton's death to delay the will's execution, and that he had indeed orchestrated Eleanor's public humiliation at the ball. "You attempted to have Miss Winters arrested for theft, using a bracelet you planted in her pocket, did you not?" Nicholas pressed. "I attempted to protect the estate from a fraudulent claim, by framing an innocent woman for a crime she did not commit, by deliberately orchestrating her public humiliation and possible imprisonment. These are the actions you claim were taken to protect the estate." Duke Hartley's face twisted with fury. "She is a servant. She has no right to inherit what should be mine. Her entire existence is an embarrassment to Lord Pemberton's memory." The outburst damaged his case irreparably. Even the judges, who had maintained carefully neutral expressions throughout, showed visible disapproval at such naked admission of malice. The deliberations took less than an hour. When the judges returned, Lord Justice Pembroke's expression was stern as he delivered their verdict. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this matter. We find that Lord Pemberton's will is valid in all respects, executed with proper formality, and while the testator was demonstrably of sound mind. The attempt by Duke Hartley to contest this will appears motivated not by legitimate legal concerns, but by personal animus and disappointed expectations of inheritance. Eleanor felt Nicholas's hand find hers beneath the table, squeezing gently in support. Furthermore, the judge continued, we are disturbed by evidence of Duke Hartley's attempts to obstruct justice through destruction of documents and his orchestration of false criminal charges against Miss Winters. Such actions bring discredit upon his character and judgment. The judge fixed Duke Hartley with a hard stare. Therefore, this court rules in favour of the respondent. Miss Eleanor Winters, legally known as Lady Eleanor Pemberton, is confirmed as the rightful heir to the estate of the late Lord Pemberton in all its particulars. The petition to invalidate the will is denied with prejudice. The gavel fell, and Eleanor felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Charlotte embraced her immediately, followed by Grace, who had rushed down from the gallery. Nicholas stood slightly apart, his face transformed by a smile of such genuine joy that Eleanor's heart felt too full to contain. Outside the courthouse, Duke Hartley made one final attempt at intimidation, confronting Eleanor on the steps. "This is not over. I will make your life a misery. Every door in society will be closed to you. You will be shunned, ridiculed, destroyed. You will do nothing," Nicholas interrupted coldly, stepping between them. "Because if you make any further attempts to harm Lady Eleanor, I will ensure that criminal charges are filed for your various offences. Attempted fraud, destruction of legal documents, conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. The list is extensive. You would be wise to accept your defeat gracefully and retire from public life before you face consequences far worse than mere loss of inheritance." Duke Hartley's face contorted with impotent rage, but he had no response that would not further incriminate him. He turned and stormed away, his solicitors scurrying after him like rats abandoning a sinking vessel. Eleanor watched him go, feeling strangely empty of triumph. She had won, secured her inheritance and her future, but the victory felt hollow, knowing it had come at such cost of revelation and conflict. "Come," Charlotte said gently. "Let us return to the townhouse and celebrate properly. You have earned your rest, Eleanor." That evening, the small group gathered in the townhouse drawing room, toasting Eleanor's victory with champagne that sparkled in the candlelight. Grace had tears of pride in her eyes. Charlotte was planning elaborate social strategies to establish Eleanor's position in society, and Nicholas simply watched Eleanor with an expression of such warmth that she felt her earlier emptiness fill with something far more valuable than mere victory. Later, when Charlotte and Grace had retired for the evening, Nicholas found Eleanor on the townhouse balcony, looking out over London's glittering nighttime landscape. "A copper for your thoughts?" he asked softly. "I was thinking that I have everything I never knew I wanted, and yet part of me still feels like that girl scrubbing floors, certain this will all vanish when I wake." Eleanor turned to face him. "Does it ever feel real, Nicholas? Give it time. You have spent 18 years being one person and only weeks being another. The adjustment will not happen overnight." He moved closer, his presence warm in the cool night air. "But Eleanor, I want you to know that regardless of your title or fortune, I would feel exactly the same about you. The woman I have come to care for is not Lady Pemberton the heiress. She is simply Eleanor, who faces challenges with courage and treats even those who wronged her with more grace than they deserve. Simply Eleanor," she repeated softly. "I am not sure such a person exists anymore. Or perhaps she existed, but was never allowed to be real until now. Then we shall discover her together." Nicholas took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Now that the legal complications are resolved, now that you are no longer under my guardianship, I would very much like to begin courting you properly, if you will permit me." Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had saved her, taught her, believed in her, and somewhere along the way had come to mean far more than any guardian or teacher should. The feelings she had been trying to suppress or rationalize flooded through her with undeniable force. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Nicholas smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious features. He raised her hand to his lips once more, but this time the kiss lingered, full of promise and possibility. Tomorrow they would return to the county, to Ashford Manor, and the responsibilities Eleanor must learn to shoulder. There would be challenges ahead, social obstacles to overcome, and a household to manage. But tonight, standing on a London balcony with Nicholas's hand in hers, and the future stretching before them like an unwritten page, Eleanor felt something she had never experienced in her life as a servant: genuine hope for happiness. 6 months had passed since the Court of Chancery's verdict, and autumn had transformed Ashford Manor's grounds into a tapestry of gold and crimson. Eleanor stood at the window of what had been her grandfather's study and was now hers, looking out over the estate that still sometimes felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The transformation of both the manor and its mistress had been gradual but profound. Under the guidance of competent stewards and with advice from Nicholas and Charlotte, Eleanor had proven herself a capable manager of her inheritance. She had toured every tenant farm, learned the names of every family who worked the land, and made improvements that balanced traditional practices with emerging agricultural innovations. Where Duke Hartley had viewed the estate purely as a source of income to be maximized, Eleanor understood it as a community of interconnected lives for which she bore responsibility. The changes showed everywhere. The tenant cottages had been repaired, new schools established for workers' children, and fair wages instituted that made Ashford Manor a desirable place of employment rather than a position accepted out of desperation. Eleanor's most controversial decision had been abolishing several of the more arbitrary rules that had governed servants' lives, treating the household staff with the respect born of having lived among them. "You coddle them," Lady Whitmore had sniffed during one of the social calls that had become more frequent as Eleanor's position solidified. "Servants require firm management, not sentimentality." "I treat them as human beings," Eleanor had replied calmly, "and in return I receive loyalty and excellent service. It seems a fair exchange." Not everyone approved of her methods, of course. There were still whispers in certain drawing rooms about the housemaid who had become a lady, speculation about whether she truly possessed the refinement required of her station. But Eleanor had learned to distinguish between criticism that mattered and prejudice that simply had to be endured until time eroded it. Charlotte had been instrumental in securing Eleanor's social position, introducing her to key families and vouching for her character with the weight of her own impeccable reputation. What had begun as an apology had transformed into genuine friendship, and Eleanor now counted Charlotte among her closest confidants. Grace had remained at Eleanor's side throughout, refusing multiple offers of more elevated positions. "You are stuck with me," she had declared, when Eleanor suggested she might prefer employment that did not require association with a controversial mistress. "We came up from the servants' quarters together, and we shall navigate society together. Besides, someone needs to remind you when you are taking yourself too seriously." The door opened behind Eleanor, admitting the person who had become most essential to her life over these past months. Nicholas Ashford entered carrying documents related to some legal matter requiring attention, but he set them aside immediately when he saw Eleanor's contemplative expression. "You are brooding again," he observed, crossing to stand beside her at the window. "What troubles you?" "Nothing troubles me exactly. I was simply thinking about how strange life is, how a single evening can alter everything. 6 months ago, I was preparing to serve in a ballroom, terrified of making some mistake that would cost me my position. Now I own the ballroom. The change seems impossible. And yet here you stand, managing an estate that thrives under your stewardship, earning respect even from those who initially dismissed you. Nicholas's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with easy familiarity. You have exceeded every expectation, Eleanor, including my own, which were already high. You are biased, my lord. I am your suitor, which grants me the privilege of bias in your favor. His tone was teasing, but his eyes held an intensity that never failed to make Eleanor's pulse quicken. And I must confess that my bias has only deepened as I have watched you bloom into the woman you were always meant to be. Their courtship had proceeded with careful propriety over the months, mindful of Eleanor's still uncertain social position and the need to avoid any scandal that might undermine her claim to respectability. But beneath the formal calls and properly chaperoned outings, a deep connection had grown, built on mutual respect, shared humor, and increasing affection that neither could fully conceal. "Nicholas," Eleanor began, then hesitated. They had been dancing around certain topics for weeks now, both aware of where their relationship was heading, but neither quite ready to speak the words aloud. "What do you see when you look at me now? Not what I have become in terms of position or property, but who I am as a person." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze searching her face with the thorough attention he brought to everything he cared about. "I see a woman of extraordinary courage, who faces every challenge without flinching. I see intelligence that was starved for education, but has devoured knowledge once given access to it. I see compassion for those struggling beneath burdens she understands personally. I see someone who treats a duchess and a kitchen maid with equal courtesy because she recognizes their common humanity." His hand came up to cup her cheek gently. "And I see the woman I have fallen completely and irrevocably in love with." Eleanor's breath caught. They had spoken of affection, of growing attachment, but love was a word neither had voiced until this moment. "Nicholas, you need not respond if you are not ready," he continued quickly. "I do not wish to pressure you, but I cannot keep pretending my feelings are anything less than they are. I love you, Eleanor, not Lady Pemberton, not the heiress, not the social curiosity. I love Eleanor, who makes me laugh with her observations about society's absurdities, who argues with me about philosophy when she thinks I am wrong, who still sometimes forgets she no longer needs to curtsy to visiting nobility." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was gratitude or dependency or anything except what it actually was. But I cannot lie to you or to myself anymore. I love you desperately, Nicholas, and I want—" She did not finish the sentence because Nicholas had bent down to kiss her, a proper kiss this time, rather than the chaste brush of lips to hand that propriety had previously allowed. Eleanor melted into the embrace, feeling the rightness of it in every cell of her being. This was where she belonged, not in a manor or a title or a social position, but here, in the arms of a man who saw her completely and loved what he saw. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. "Eleanor Winters, Lady Pemberton, woman of 1,000 names and one essential self, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her again, and Eleanor felt something she had been carrying for months finally release, the last lingering doubt that she deserved this happiness, that someone like her could have a life built on love rather than survival. They were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that reflected their unconventional path to happiness. Rather than the grand society wedding Charlotte initially proposed, Eleanor and Nicholas chose an intimate gathering in Ashford Manor's private chapel, attended by those who truly mattered to them. Charlotte and Grace as witnesses, Mr. Hargreaves representing Lord Pemberton's memory, and a small number of genuine friends rather than social obligations. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory silk that Charlotte had helped her select, simple but elegant, decorated with lace that had belonged to her mother. As she stood before the vicar reciting her vows, she thought of Martha Winters and the secrets she had carried, the sacrifices she had made to protect her daughter from scandal. Eleanor wished desperately that her mother could have seen this day, could have known that her daughter had found not merely security, but genuine love. But perhaps Martha was watching somehow, Eleanor thought, as Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger. Perhaps both her mother and grandfather were present in spirit, pleased that their carefully laid plans had resulted not just in Eleanor's material security, but in her happiness. The wedding breakfast was a joyful affair, filled with laughter and music and the warmth of people who cared for each other genuinely rather than out of social obligation. Grace gave a speech that had everyone in tears one moment and laughing the next, recounting Eleanor's journey from terrified housemaid to confident lady with a blend of humor and affection that captured their friendship perfectly. To Eleanor, Grace concluded, raising her glass, who proves that where you start matters far less than who you choose to become. May you bloom brilliantly wherever life plants you. Do, to Eleanor, the gathered guests echoed, and Eleanor felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it all. Later, as carriages departed and the manor settled into evening quiet, Eleanor and Nicholas walked through the gardens that Eleanor's mother had once tended as part of her duties. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of coming winter, but Eleanor felt only warmth. "Are you happy?" Nicholas asked, his arm around her waist as they strolled past flower beds being prepared for dormancy. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back in the servants' quarters. All of this just a beautiful dream. If you do, I shall wake up beside you, which will confirm it is reality. Dreams do not include handsome earls as husbands." Eleanor laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "Your humility is truly inspiring, my lord. I am merely stating facts, my lady. Besides, you married me. Your judgment in selecting handsome earls is clearly impeccable." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence as they reached the small family cemetery at the edge of the gardens. Lord Pemberton's grave bore a simple marker bearing his name and dates, and beside it a newer stone for Martha Winters that Eleanor had commissioned. The inscription read, "Martha Winters, beloved daughter and mother, who carried her burdens with grace and courage." Eleanor stood before the graves, Nicholas's presence steady beside her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting me, for planning my future, even when it meant you could not acknowledge me, for believing I could be more than circumstances tried to make me." No answer came, except the rustle of wind through dying leaves, but Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her nonetheless. The past, with all its pain and secrets, could not be changed, but she could honor it by living the future they had tried to secure for her. "Come," Nicholas said gently, "it grows cold, and your new home awaits." "Our home," Eleanor corrected, taking his hand. "Everything I have is ours together now." They walked back toward the manor, its windows glowing with welcoming light against the deepening dusk. This house that had been both prison and sanctuary, site of her humiliation and ultimately her triumph, was now truly home in a way it had never been before. Years would pass, and Eleanor would face new challenges, society matrons who never fully accepted her origins, business complications requiring difficult decisions, the responsibilities of maintaining a great estate through changing times. There would be sorrows too, losses and disappointments that life inevitably brought, but through everything, she would face it with the strength forged in those transformative months when she had learned to claim her identity and her worth. And always she would remember the frightened girl carrying a tray through a ballroom, invisible and insignificant, who had somehow transformed into Lady Eleanor Ashford, Countess of Hartwick and Mistress of Ashford Manor. Not because of magic or luck, but because, when given the opportunity to become more than circumstances had designed her to be, she had possessed the courage to reach for it. Duke Sterling Hartley's fate provided a bitter footnote to Eleanor's triumph. Unable to accept his defeat, he had attempted to reconstruct his fortune through increasingly desperate schemes. Within 2 years, he had fled to the continent to escape creditors, his reputation destroyed and his title hollow without the estate that had given it meaning. Eleanor occasionally heard reports of his movements, always declining further into poverty and obscurity. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall. The cruelty he had shown her had stemmed from his own desperation and inability to accept that worth was not determined by birth alone. In the end, Duke Hartley had destroyed himself far more thoroughly than Eleanor could ever have managed, victim of his own inability to adapt when the world refused to conform to his expectations. Charlotte, who had witnessed her former suitor's decline, shared the final news one afternoon during tea at Ashford Manor. Sterling has been seen in Paris, gambling away what little money his mother manages to send him. It is a pathetic ending for someone who once seemed to have everything. He did have everything, Eleanor replied quietly, but he could not see value in anything except what society told him was valuable. That is the real tragedy. You are more charitable than he deserves. Perhaps, but I have learned that carrying anger and resentment only poisons the person carrying it. Sterling Hartley has no power over my life anymore. Why should I waste energy hating him? Charlotte smiled, shaking her head in wonder. You continue to surprise me, Eleanor. Most people in your position would demand vengeance. I have something better than vengeance. I have a life I love, work that matters, and people who care for me. That is the greatest victory possible. Dad, as winter turned to spring and spring to summer, as Eleanor and Nicholas's first child was born, a daughter they named Martha in honor of Eleanor's mother, as the estate flourished and their happiness deepened, Eleanor often thought about the title of a book she had once glimpsed in Lord Pemberton's library, Great Expectations. Her own life had proven that expectations, whether low or high, mattered less than what one did when given opportunity. She had bloomed where she was planted, first in the constrained space of service, making beauty even in that restrictive environment, and then in the expansive soil of her inheritance, growing into something she could never have imagined in those early years. The location changed, but the essential nature remained. Eleanor, who met challenges with courage, treated people with dignity, and believed that circumstances could be transformed through determination and hope. On quiet evenings, when she and Nicholas sat in the library after putting their daughter to bed, reading companionably beside the fire, Eleanor would sometimes catch her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was elegant and confident, secure in her position and her worth, but if she looked closely, she could still see the girl underneath, the one who had scrubbed floors and learned to be invisible. Both versions were real, both were her, and together they made her whole. If you have been listening to this story, thank you for joining me on Eleanor's journey from the servants' quarters to the mistress's chamber. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, transformation, and finding love where you least expect it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic historical stories, and tell me in the comments which part of Eleanor's story resonated most with you. Your engagement helps these stories reach listeners around the world who need to hear that their beginnings do not determine their endings.